The dust from the stagecoach settled around Vivian Pierce as she stood alone at the crossroads, her trembling hand clutching an empty coin purse, the last of her money gone to a driver who'd left her miles from where she needed to be. The year was 1875, and the unforgiving New Mexico territory spread before her like a death sentence as the late afternoon sun beat down on her tear-streaked face. Vivian smoothed her travel-worn dress, the once fine fabric now frayed at the edges after the 3-week journey from Philadelphia. The money her father had given her before his death had seemed substantial enough to start a new life teaching in Santa Fe, but a series of misfortunes, a pickpocket in Chicago, an unexpected delay in Kansas City, and now this final betrayal by the stagecoach driver had left her destitute. The crossroads offered little hope. One dusty trail led north toward distant mountains, another south into a vast emptiness, and a third westward toward what might be civilization, marked only by wheel ruts in the hard-packed earth. The eastern road, the one she'd traveled, led back to nothing but heartache and an empty home she could no longer afford. Vivian sank to her knees, her carpet bag and small trunk containing her remaining worldly possessions sitting uselessly beside her. The late September heat had already drained her water supply, and thirst scratched at her throat. She had been a fool to believe she could make this journey alone, a 22-year-old schoolteacher with no knowledge of the West beyond what she'd read in books. As the sun dipped lower, Vivian spotted movement on the horizon, a rider approaching from the western trail. Her first instinct was fear. She'd heard stories of outlaws and bandits who preyed on travelers, but desperation kept her rooted to the spot. If this was to be her end, at least it would come quickly. The rider slowed as he approached, a tall figure atop a chestnut stallion. The man pulled his horse to a stop several yards away, studying her with sharp blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but cautious. "You all right?" Vivian swallowed hard, finding her voice. "I've been better, sir." He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his full height. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore simple clothes, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest, all bearing the marks of hard work. His face was weathered but not unkind, with several days' worth of stubble and lines that suggested he smiled often. "Name's Forrest Chandler," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Got a ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Vivian Pierce," she replied, attempting to stand and maintain what dignity she had left. Her legs, cramped from kneeling, betrayed her and she stumbled. Forrest moved quickly, catching her arm. "Easy now." "Thank you," Vivian whispered, mortified by her weakness. "The stagecoach driver said this was the stop for Chisholm Ranch. He took my last dollar and left me here." Forrest's expression darkened. "Chisholm Ranch is 20 miles northwest." "This here's just Morrison's Crossing." He glanced at her luggage. "You were headed to Chisholm." "I was to be the new schoolteacher," Vivian explained, fighting back tears of frustration. "I have an appointment letter, but—" She gestured helplessly at her surroundings. Forrest nodded, understanding her predicament without requiring further explanation. "Sun's getting low. It's not safe out here at night. Coyotes may be worse." He paused, seeming to consider his options. "My place isn't fancy, but I've got a spare room. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow I'll take you to Chisholm." Vivian hesitated. Accepting help from a strange man went against everything she'd been taught about propriety, but the growing chill in the air and the emptiness of the landscape left her with little choice. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Chandler, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition, Miss Pierce. Can't leave a lady stranded out here. It wouldn't be right." He moved toward her trunk. "This all you got?" When Vivian nodded, Forrest secured her trunk to his horse with practiced efficiency, then gathered her carpet bag. "You can ride Samson. He's gentle enough." Before she could protest, he had lifted her onto the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. He took the reins and began leading the horse westward, walking alongside. "Your ranch is far?" Vivian asked, embarrassed that he was walking while she rode. "Not far enough to worry about," Forrest replied, his stride long and confident. "Been walking these lands since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." As they traveled, the landscape began to change subtly. The barren crossroads gave way to scattered junipers and piñon pines, suggesting water somewhere beneath the surface. Vivian found herself studying her rescuer's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert but not fearful. "You from back east?" he asked after they had walked in silence for some time. "Philadelphia," Vivian confirmed. "My father passed this spring. He was a professor at the university there. When he was gone, there was nothing left for me." Forrest nodded. "Sorry about your father. Lost mine too, about 10 years back. It's what brought me out here." "To New Mexico, to freedom," he said simply. They crested a small ridge, and Forrest's ranch came into view, a modest homestead nestled in a shallow valley. A small but sturdy log cabin stood at its center, with a barn and corral nearby. A creek wound through the property, explaining the surprising patch of greenery surrounding the buildings. "It's not much," Forrest said, a hint of pride in his voice despite his humble words. "But it's mine, paid for with 6 years of sweat." "It's lovely," Vivian said sincerely, impressed by the evident care with which the place had been built. In Philadelphia, such a small dwelling would be considered poor indeed, but here, against the vast backdrop of the territory, it seemed like a remarkable achievement. As they approached the cabin, a dog bounded out to greet them, a black and white border collie who circled excitedly around Forrest's legs before turning curious eyes on Vivian. "That's Pepper," Forrest said. "She won't bite, just wants to know who you are." "Hello, Pepper," Vivian said, extending her hand carefully after Forrest helped her down from the horse. The dog sniffed her fingers, then gave them a quick lick before returning to Forrest's side. "She approves," Forrest noted with a small smile, the first Vivian had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the weather-beaten features and bringing a warmth to his eyes that made Vivian's heart beat a little faster. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led to what Vivian assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was handmade but solid, a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and shelves holding a surprising number of books. "You read?" Vivian couldn't help asking, moving toward the shelves. "When there's time," Forrest replied, setting her carpet bag down. "Winter evenings get long out here." Vivian ran her fingers along the spine's volumes of history, adventure tales, even poetry. "My father would have liked you," she said softly. Forrest seemed pleased by this, though he only nodded and moved to the small kitchen area. "You must be hungry. I don't have much, but there's stew from yesterday." While he busied himself reheating the meal, Vivian took in more details of the cabin. Despite its simplicity, there were touches that spoke of care: a hand-sewn quilt on the rocking chair, a vase of wildflowers on the table, curtains at the windows. "Did you make all this?" she asked. "Most of it," Forrest admitted. "The quilt was my mother's. She insisted I take it when I left Pennsylvania." "You're from Pennsylvania too?" Vivian was surprised by the coincidence. "Small town outside Pittsburgh, coal country." He stirred the pot on the small iron stove. "My father worked the mines, died in one too. I decided there were better ways to live." Vivian understood then why he had described coming west as finding freedom. She'd seen the mining towns, the families trapped in cycles of poverty and danger, generation after generation. The stew was simple but delicious venison with wild onions and potatoes. They ate at the table, the conversation flowing more easily than Vivian would have expected. Forrest asked about her teaching, and she found herself explaining her passion for education with an enthusiasm that brought color to her cheeks. "I believe every child deserves the chance to learn," she said earnestly. "Knowledge is the one thing that can't be taken away." Forrest listened attentively, his respect for her evident in his gaze. "Chisholm Ranch will be lucky to have you," he said. "The children there have had a succession of teachers. None stay more than a season." Vivian's face fell. "Why not?" "Life out here isn't easy for Eastern folk," he said gently. "Especially women alone. The work is hard, comforts are few, and winters can be brutal." "I'm stronger than I look," Vivian insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. After all, she'd barely survived her journey, ending up penniless at a crossroads. Forrest seemed to read her thoughts. "Being stranded wasn't your doing, and you're still here, still determined. That counts for something." After the meal, Forrest showed her to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the creek. "It was meant to be a child's room," he explained, a shadow crossing his features. "Never had cause to use it. You're not married?" Vivian asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that was forward." "No offense taken," Forrest assured her. "Was engaged once back east. Ellen was her name. She changed her mind about coming west." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken hurt, and Vivian's heart ached for him. "Her loss," she said softly. Forrest's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of shared loneliness recognized and acknowledged. "Get some rest, Miss Pierce," he said finally. "Morning comes early out here." Left alone, Vivian unpacked her nightgown and prepared for bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Forrest moving about the cabin, banking the fire for the night, speaking softly to the dog. There was something deeply comforting about those sounds after weeks of strange hotels and the constant chaos of travel. As she drifted toward sleep, Vivian found herself wondering what might have happened if the stagecoach driver had taken her to the right destination. She would never have met Forrest Chandler or seen his quiet, dignified homestead. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt safe. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the small window. For a moment, Vivian was disoriented, then remembered the previous day's events. The delicious aroma of coffee and something baking drew her from bed. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, the best being too travel-worn to wear again without washing, and made her way to the main room. Forrest stood at the stove, his back to her, broader in the morning light than she had realized. He turned at her entrance, and she was struck again by the clarity of his blue eyes. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Vivian admitted. "Thank you." Breakfast was cornbread and eggs, simple but filling. As they ate, Forrest explained his plan for the day. "I need to check on the south pasture cattle before we leave for Chisholm. Won't take more than an hour. After that, we'll hitch up the wagon and get you where you need to be." Vivian nodded, though a strange reluctance filled her at the thought of leaving. "Is there anything I can do to help while you're gone, to repay your kindness?" Forrest seemed about to refuse, then reconsidered. "If you've a mind to, there's laundry soaking that could use hanging. But don't feel obliged." When he'd gone, Vivian tackled the laundry with determination. The work was harder than she'd anticipated, wringing the heavy fabric with hands unused to such labor. but there was satisfaction in seeing the clean shirts and trousers flapping on the line in the morning breeze. Inside, she noticed the breakfast dishes still waiting. She washed those too, then swept the wooden floor for good measure. The physical activity kept her from dwelling too much on the uncertainty of what awaited her at Chisholm Ranch. When Forrest returned, he pulled up short at the sight of his clean cabin and the laundry drying in the sun. "You didn't have to do all that," he said, but the appreciation in his voice was evident. "I wanted to," Vivian replied simply. As Forrest prepared the wagon, Vivian found herself watching his movements, the easy strength with which he lifted her trunk, the gentle way he spoke to the horses as he hitched them to the wagon. There was something deeply appealing about his self-sufficiency, his quiet competence. The journey to Chisholm Ranch took most of the morning. As they traveled, Forrest pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area. He told her about the Apache who sometimes passed through the territory, about the ranchers and homesteaders who had become his neighbors and friends over the years. "Not many women out here," he noted. "Those who come usually arrive with husbands or family." "I've never been one to follow the expected path," Vivian admitted. "My father encouraged independence. He said a woman's mind was as valuable as any man's." "Wise man," Forrest commented. "Out here, independence matters more than back east. Nature doesn't care much about social rules." As they approached Chisholm Ranch, Vivian's anxiety grew. The settlement was larger than she'd expected, a cluster of buildings surrounding a central square, with corrals and barns spreading outward. Several large ranch houses stood on the surrounding hillsides, belonging to the wealthier cattle barons who had given the town its name. "The schoolhouse is there," Forrest pointed to a small building set slightly apart from the others. "Accommodations for the teacher should be behind it." When they reached the town center, Forrest helped Vivian down from the wagon. People stopped to stare at the newcomers, and Vivian felt suddenly self-conscious about her wrinkled dress and wind-blown hair. "I should find Mr. Blackwell," she said, clutching her appointment letter. "He's the head of the school board." Forrest nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll wait with your things." But finding Mr. Blackwell proved more difficult than anticipated. When Vivian asked at the general store, the clerk's face fell. "Oh, miss, didn't you get word?" "Mr. Blackwell passed 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick." Vivian's heart sank. "But the teaching position, best talk to Mrs. Hargrove. She's taken over school matters for now." Mrs. Hargrove, a stern-faced woman with iron gray hair, listened to Vivian's explanation with growing dismay. "I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding, Miss Pierce," she said. "After Mr. Blackwell's death, the board voted to postpone hiring a new teacher until spring. The funds simply aren't available now." "But I have a contract," Vivian protested, producing the letter. Mrs. Hargrove examined it and sighed. "This is Mr. Blackwell's signature, sure enough, but he had no authority to hire without board approval." She handed the letter back. "I'm truly sorry you've come all this way for nothing." Stunned, Vivian made her way back to where Forrest waited. One look at her face told him everything. "No position?" he asked quietly. "No position, no accommodations, no money." Vivian fought back tears. "Mr. Blackwell died, and apparently he hired me without proper authorization." Forrest's jaw tightened. "What will you do now?" Vivian looked around the bustling town, feeling more lost than she had at the Crossroads. "I don't know. I suppose I could try to find work here. Perhaps the hotel needs help." "The hotel's full up with ranch hands," Forrest said, "and the only other work for women here is—" He trailed off, unwilling to speak of the saloon girls who provided the town's only other female employment. "I see," Vivian said quietly. Forrest was silent for a long moment, seeming to wage an internal debate. Finally, he spoke. "I need help on my ranch." Vivian looked up, confused. Pardon. Winter's coming. There's plenty to do before the first snow, preserving, mending, preparing. I could use an extra pair of hands. He hesitated. It wouldn't be proper, a single woman staying with a man, but there's the cabin. Cabin, about 100 yards from the main house. It's small, just one room, but sound. Built it as a place to smoke meat, but never got around to using it for that. Forrest looked at her directly. You could stay there, help with the housework, maybe teach me to read better. Come spring, if you still want to teach, there might be a position here. Vivian's mind raced. The offer was unconventional, potentially scandalous by Eastern standards. But she was thousands of miles from Philadelphia with no money and no prospects. People would talk, she said hesitantly. People always talk, Forrest replied. But my neighbors know me. No one would think ill of you, he paused. I'm not offering charity, Miss Pierce. It would be a fair exchange, your work for room and board, plus a small wage when I can manage it. The sincerity in his eyes convinced her. Then I accept, Mr. Chandler, at least until spring. Relief washed over his features. Good. Let's get supplies while we're here. Winter comes hard in these parts. They spent the afternoon gathering provisions, flour, coffee, sugar, dried beans, and other staples that would see them through the coming months. Forrest insisted on purchasing fabric for new curtains and a dress, brushing aside Vivian's protests. Consider it in advance, he said firmly. By the time they left Chisholm Ranch, the wagon was loaded with supplies, and Vivian had a clearer picture of what awaited her. The work would be hard, the conditions primitive compared to her life in Philadelphia. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt a sense of purpose. As they drove back toward Forrest's ranch, the setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson. Vivian found herself studying her companion's profile, wondering what twist of fate had brought her to this moment homeless and unemployed, yet somehow not without hope. Thank you, she said simply. Forrest glanced at her, the sunset reflecting in his eyes. Don't thank me yet. Ranch life isn't easy. I'm not afraid of hard work. No, he agreed. I don't believe you are. The small cabin Forrest had mentioned proved to be sturdier than Vivian had expected. Though basic, a single room with a small stove, a bed frame, and little else, it had a tight roof and solid walls that would keep out the winter cold. It needs work, Forrest admitted as they inspected it the following morning. Floor needs sweeping, windows need washing, and that bed needs a proper mattress. I can manage most of that, Vivian assured him. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Vivian rose early, preparing breakfast in the main cabin while Forrest tended the livestock. After eating, they each attended to their tasks, Forrest working the land, mending fences, and preparing for winter, while Vivian cleaned, organized, and slowly transformed the small cabin into a habitable space. In the evenings, true to their arrangement, Vivian spent an hour helping Forrest improve his reading. Though not illiterate, he struggled with more complex texts, having had only minimal formal education before being sent to work in the mines as a boy. My father believed reading was a waste of time for working folk, Forrest explained one evening as they sat at the table, a volume of Emerson's essays open between them. Mother taught me in secret when I was small. She gave you a precious gift, Vivian said. Forrest nodded. I know that now. I've been trying to improve on my own, but some of these words. He gestured at the page. You're doing wonderfully, Vivian encouraged him. Reading is like any skill, it improves with practice. As the days passed, Vivian found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, thoughtful man. His kindness revealed itself in countless small ways: the fresh flowers he brought for her cabin, the care he took to split extra firewood for her stove, the respect with which he always treated her opinions and ideas. October faded into November, bringing colder nights and occasional morning frost. Vivian's small cabin was cozy now, furnished with items Forrest had helped her salvage or create a proper mattress stuffed with clean straw and topped with quilts, curtains she'd sewn from the fabric purchased in town, a small bookshelf Forrest had built for the few volumes she'd brought from Philadelphia. One evening, as they finished their reading lesson, Forrest seemed hesitant to leave, lingering at the table long after they'd closed the book. "Something troubling you?" Vivian asked. "Been thinking," he said slowly. "Town socials coming up next weekend in Chisholm. Dance, supper, that sort of thing." He cleared his throat. "Thought you might like to go meet some of the folks roundabout." Vivian was touched by the invitation. "I'd like that very much." The smile that lit his face made her heart skip. "Good, that's good." The week before the social passed in a flurry of preparation. Vivian worked frantically to finish the new dress she'd been sewing, while Forrest spent extra time grooming the horses and polishing the wagon. When Saturday arrived, Vivian felt a nervousness she hadn't experienced since her first teaching assignment. She dressed carefully in her new creation, a deep blue dress with simple lines that complemented her fair coloring. She'd twisted her chestnut hair into an elegant knot, securing it with her mother's silver combs, one of the few treasures she'd brought from home. Forrest's reaction when she emerged from her cabin made the effort worthwhile. He stood by the wagon, dressed in his best clothes, clean black trousers, a white shirt, and a dark coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. At the sight of her, he removed his hat, his eyes wide with appreciation. "Miss Pierce," he said, his voice oddly formal, "you look beautiful." Vivian felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, Mr. Chandler. You look quite handsome yourself." The journey to town was filled with anticipation. Forrest pointed out ranches they passed, telling her about the families who lived there. Vivian realized how isolated she'd been these past weeks, seeing no one but Forrest, and occasionally the traveling peddler who stopped by the ranch. The town hall in Chisholm Ranch had been transformed for the social. Lanterns hung from the rafters, tables laden with food lined the walls, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes on fiddle, guitar, and banjo. Vivian felt the stares as they entered. A few women whispered behind their hands, and she knew they were speculating about her relationship with Forrest. But he seemed unperturbed, guiding her toward a group of people he knew. "Folks, this is Miss Vivian Pierce," he introduced her. "She's helping out at my place this winter." To Vivian's relief, most people welcomed her warmly. The women were curious about her Eastern background, while several men sought to claim dances. Through it all, Forrest remained nearby, his eyes finding hers across the room whenever they were separated. When he finally claimed her for a dance, Vivian felt a thrill as his hand settled at her waist. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked as they moved to the music. "Very much," she admitted. "Everyone has been kind." "Told you they would be," he said, expertly guiding her through a turn. "People out here judge by actions, not circumstances." As the evening progressed, Vivian noticed a tall, elegantly dressed woman watching them with open interest. Eventually, the woman approached, her expensive dress rustling. "So you're the mysterious Eastern lady staying at Forrest's ranch," she said, her tone friendly but her eyes assessing. "I'm Margaret Wilcox. My husband owns the largest spread north of town." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Wilcox," Vivian replied politely. "Call me Margaret, please." She glanced at Forrest. "This one's been a confirmed bachelor so long we'd given up hope. Now I see why he's been scarce in town lately." Forrest cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Pierce is my employee, Margaret, nothing more." Something like disappointment flashed across Vivian's heart at his words. Though she knew they were proper and true, Margaret smiled knowingly. "Of course. My mistake." She turned back to Vivian. "You must come to tea next week. I'll send the carriage for you on Wednesday." Before Vivian could respond, Margaret had swept away to greet other guests. "Sorry about that," Forrest said quietly. "Margaret means well, but she likes to meddle." "It's fine," Vivian assured him, though a question lingered in her mind. Was she nothing more to him than an employee? The thought bothered her more than it should have. The ride home was quieter than the journey to town. Vivian, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill, found herself stealing glances at Forrest's profile. The moon silvered his features, highlighting the strong jawline and the gentleness around his eyes. "Did you really mean that?" she finally asked. "That I'm nothing more than an employee?" Forrest's hands tightened on the reins. "You know that's not true," he said after a long pause. "But it's what people needed to hear." "What am I, then?" He looked at her then, his gaze so intense that Vivian felt it like a physical touch. "You're a miracle," he said simply. "A gift I never expected and don't deserve." The words hung between them, changing everything and nothing. When they reached the ranch, Forrest helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Miss Pierce," he said formally, though his eyes told a different story. "Good night, Mr. Chandler," Vivian replied, suddenly shy. In her cabin, Vivian lay awake long into the night, replaying his words. A miracle. A gift. Her heart raced at the memory. She hadn't come west looking for love, she'd come seeking independence, a chance to build a life on her own terms. Yet here, in this remote place with this quiet, thoughtful man, she'd found something unexpected. The days following the social took on a new quality. Though nothing had been declared openly, something had shifted between them. Their fingers brushed more often when passing tools or dishes. Their eyes met and held across rooms. Conversations deepened, revealing more of their hopes and fears. When Wednesday came, Margaret's carriage arrived as promised. The Wilcox Ranch was impressive, a large, well-appointed home that reminded Vivian of the better neighborhoods in Philadelphia. Margaret welcomed her warmly, introducing her to several other ranchers' wives who had been invited for tea. While the conversation began with polite inquiries about Vivian's background, it soon turned to more personal matters. "So, you and Forrest Chandler," one woman began. "How long have you known each other?" "Only since September," Vivian replied truthfully. "He found me stranded at Morrison's Crossing when the stage coach left me there by mistake." The women exchanged glances. "And he offered you employment," Margaret pressed. "Just like that." "I was to be the school teacher here," Vivian explained. "When that position fell through, Mr. Chandler kindly offered me work until spring." "Forrest Chandler is a good man," another woman said firmly. "One of the best in the territory. Never known him to take advantage." "No one's suggesting that, Sarah," Margaret said smoothly. "But you must admit it's unusual. Forrest has been alone since he came here, turned down every match we tried to make." Vivian felt uncomfortable under their scrutiny. "Our arrangement is purely professional," she insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Margaret smiled. "Of course. But you should know that Forrest is considered quite a catch. His ranch may be smaller than some, but it's prosperous and growing. And he's respected by everyone from the territorial governor to the Apache who pass through." On the ride back to the ranch, Vivian pondered Margaret's words. She'd known Forrest was well regarded, but hadn't realized the extent of his standing in the community. It made his interest in her, whatever its nature, all the more significant. When she returned, she found Forrest repairing the corral fence, his sleeves rolled up despite the November chill, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of labor. "How was your tea party?" he asked, setting down his hammer. "Enlightening," Vivian replied with a small smile. Apparently, you're quite the eligible bachelor, Forrest groaned. Margaret's matchmaking again, more like providing information. Vivian watched his face. Why did you never marry, Forrest? After Ellen, I mean. He sighed, leaning against the fence post. Never met anyone who made me want to, he said honestly. And I've seen too many unhappy marriages to settle for companionship without love. The word hung between them, love. Vivian's heart quickened. What about you? Forrest asked. No suitors back in Philadelphia, a few, she admitted. But no one who saw me as more than a professor's daughter with a dowry. She paused. No one who made me want to give up my independence. Forrest nodded, understanding. Independence matters. So does being seen for who you truly are. Their eyes met, and Vivian felt the current between them strengthen. Here was a man who did see her not as a potential wife or a vulnerable woman, but as a person of worth and substance. As November deepened toward December, the weather turned sharply colder. The first snow fell, a light dusting that melted by noon but served as a warning of winter's approach. Forrest worked from dawn until dusk, ensuring every preparation was complete before the heavy snows arrived. One evening, as Vivian was preparing to return to her cabin after their reading lesson, a bitter wind began to howl around the main house. Snow started falling heavily, driven sideways by the gale. You can't go out in that, Forrest said firmly, moving to the window. It's turned into a proper blizzard. Vivian hesitated, aware of the impropriety of staying the night in his home. I'll be fine. It's only a short walk. Short enough to get lost in and freeze to death, Forrest replied, his tone brooking no argument. You'll take my bed, I'll sleep by the fire. Before she could protest, he was gathering extra blankets and arranging them near the hearth. No sense risking your life for propriety's sake, he added more gently. No one's here to judge, and I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you. Reluctantly, Vivian agreed. Forrest lent her one of his shirts to sleep in, turning his back politely while she changed behind the bedroom door. When she emerged to say goodnight, the sight of her in his clothing affected him visibly, a flush rising from his neck, his eyes darkening before he quickly looked away. Sleep well, Miss Pierce, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Good night, Mr. Chandler, she replied, equally formal despite the intimacy of their situation in his bed, surrounded by his scent pine and leather and clean male skin. Vivian lay awake for hours. She could hear him moving occasionally in the main room, adding wood to the fire, speaking softly to the dog. It was a strangely domestic moment, one that stirred longings she'd never fully acknowledged. Morning brought clarity with the blinding whiteness of fresh snow covering everything in sight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape, pristine, beautiful and treacherous. Forrest was already up when Vivian emerged from the bedroom, dressed once more in her own clothes. He stood at the stove, cooking breakfast, and turned at her entrance. Morning, he said, his eyes lingering on her face. Sleep all right? Yes, thank you, Vivian replied, though it wasn't entirely true. Dreams of him had plagued her throughout the night. After breakfast, Forrest helped her back to her cabin, breaking a path through snow that reached past their ankles. The small building had weathered the storm well, though it was cold inside until Vivian got a fire going in the stove. I'll bring more firewood later, Forrest promised as he prepared to leave. And Vivian. It was the first time he'd used her given name. If the weather turns again, don't hesitate to come to the main house. Your safety matters more than what anyone might think. The use of her name, the concern in his voice, the way his eyes held hers, all of it combined to make Vivian reckless. Before she could reconsider, she stepped forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Thank you, Forrest, she said softly, for everything. He stood frozen, his eyes wide with surprise. Then slowly his hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been. A smile spread across his face, transforming his features. "You're welcome," he replied simply, but the warmth in his voice conveyed so much more. December brought the full force of winter to the territory. Heavy snows alternated with bitter clear days when the temperature dropped so low that water froze in buckets inside the cabins. Travel became difficult, limiting their contact with neighbors and town. Yet despite the harsh conditions, or perhaps because of them, Vivian and Forrest grew closer. The isolation created an intimacy that might have taken months to develop otherwise. They shared meals, stories, and increasingly, their hopes for the future. One evening, as they sat before the fire in the main cabin after dinner, Forrest spoke of his plans for the ranch. "I want to expand the herd come spring," he said. "Build a proper garden, too, with a greenhouse so we can grow vegetables even in winter." "We?" Vivian asked softly, not missing his choice of words. Forrest met her gaze directly. "Been meaning to talk to you about that. Your arrangement here was until spring, when the teaching position might open again." He hesitated. "But I'm hoping you might consider staying longer." Vivian's heart raced. "As your employee?" "No." Forrest set aside the book he'd been holding and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Vivian, I know this is sudden. We've known each other only a few months, but I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not a man of fancy words, but I do know that finding you at that crossroads was the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears pricked at Vivian's eyes. "Forrest, let me finish," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just want you to know that if you choose to stay, it would be as my wife. If you want that. If not, I'll still take you to town in spring, help you find a teaching position elsewhere." Vivian looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw everything she'd ever wanted: respect, partnership, and love. Not the shallow affection offered by her Philadelphia suitors, but something deep and enduring. "I don't need until spring," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know what I want, Forrest Chandler. I want you. I want this life we've started building." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but he sealed it with words. "I love you, Vivian Pierce." "And I love you," she replied, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. When he kissed her, their first real kiss, it was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that took her breath away. His arms encircled her, strong and protective, as if he'd never let her go. They agreed to marry as soon as the weather permitted travel to town. In the meantime, they maintained separate accommodations, though their days were spent entirely together. The winter passed in a haze of happiness despite the harsh conditions. They made plans for the spring, for their life together, for improvements to the ranch that would make it truly their home. By February, cabin fever had set in, and they were eager for the first signs of spring. When a brief thaw made the roads passable, Forrest hitched the wagon for a trip to Chisholm Ranch. They needed supplies, but more importantly, they wanted to speak with the minister about their wedding. The town welcomed them warmly after their winter isolation. While Forrest tended to business with the general store owner, Vivian sought out Reverend Thomas to discuss their plans for a simple ceremony in March. "It would be my pleasure to join you in matrimony," the kind-faced minister assured her. "Forrest Chandler is one of the finest men I know. I'm delighted he's found happiness with you." As Vivian left the church, she nearly collided with Margaret Wilcox, who greeted her with genuine pleasure. "My dear, you're positively glowing," Margaret exclaimed. "Winter isolation seems to agree with you." Vivian smiled. "I have news, actually. Forrest and I are to be married next month." Margaret's delight was unfeigned. "Wonderful. You must let me help with the arrangements." Nothing elaborate, of course, but every bride deserves a proper celebration. By the time Forrest found her, Vivian had somehow acquired a wedding committee of 5 determined women, all insisting on contributing to the occasion. He took the news with good humor. "Whatever makes you happy," he told her as they drove home. "Though I'd marry you in a barnyard if that was the only option." "Let's save that for a last resort," Vivian laughed. The remainder of February passed quickly as they prepared for both the wedding and spring planting. Forrest built a proper bed frame for the main house large enough for 2, while Vivian sewed curtains and linens for their shared future. March arrived with warmer days, and the first hints of green returning to the landscape. A week before their wedding, however, disaster struck. Vivian woke in her cabin to the smell of smoke and the sound of frantic shouting. Racing outside, she saw flames engulfing the barn, with Forrest and Pepper working desperately to free the animals trapped inside. Without hesitation, Vivian ran to help, filling buckets from the creek and passing them to Forrest. Together, they managed to save the horses and most of the equipment, but the barn itself was a total loss. Exhausted and soot-covered, they surveyed the damage as dawn broke. "Could have been worse," Forrest said grimly. "No one hurt, animals safe." But Vivian could see the calculation in his eyes, the cost of rebuilding, the setback to their plans. "What caused it?" she asked. "Lantern fell, most likely. Left one hanging when I checked on the new foal last night." He shook his head, angry at himself. "Careless." "It was an accident," Vivian insisted, taking his blackened hand in hers. "We'll rebuild." Forrest squeezed her fingers. "Wedding might have to wait. Money set aside for that will need to go to lumber and supplies now." "The wedding can be simpler," Vivian said firmly. "I don't need anything fancy, just you." The determination in her voice seemed to restore something in him. Forrest pulled her into his arms, heedless of their filthy condition. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You stopped for a stranger at a crossroads," Vivian reminded him. Everything good followed from that moment. News of the fire spread quickly. By afternoon, neighbors began arriving, men with tools and lumber, women with food and offers of help. The community that had seemed so distant during winter revealed its true nature in crisis. "We take care of our own," explained Sam Wilson, owner of the neighboring ranch, as he helped raise the first wall of the new barn. "Forrest would do the same for any of us." For 3 days, the work continued. Vivian cooked for the volunteers, tended to minor injuries, and did whatever was needed. By the 4th day, a new barn stood in place of the old, not fully finished, but structurally sound and ready for use. "Wasn't planning on a barn raising before our wedding," Forrest commented as the last of the neighbors departed. "But I'm grateful." "It's a good community," Vivian agreed. "I'm proud to be joining it." Despite the setback, their wedding proceeded as planned, though with modifications. Instead of new clothes, they wore their best existing outfits. The celebration was held at the Wilcox Ranch, with Margaret insisting on providing food and decorations as her gift. On the morning of her wedding, Vivian dressed in her blue dress, now carefully cleaned and pressed, and arranged her hair with her mother's combs. As she prepared to leave her small cabin for the last time, she took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. 7 months ago, she had stood alone at a crossroads, penniless and desperate. Now she was about to marry a man she loved deeply, becoming part of a community that had welcomed her despite her unconventional arrival. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Reverend Thomas spoke of partnership and endurance, of love tested by hardship and strengthened by shared purpose, words that resonated deeply with both Vivian and Forrest. When they exchanged vows, Forrest's voice was clear and confident. "I, Forrest James Chandler, take you, Vivian Elizabeth Pierce, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as we both shall live." Vivian repeated the traditional words, then added her own promise. "I came west seeking independence, and found instead a partnership more valuable than anything I could have imagined. I pledge to stand beside you in all things, to build our life together with love and determination." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Forrest's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would share. The celebration that followed was joyous, with music, dancing, and more food than their small community had seen in one place since Christmas. As the sun began to set, Forrest found Vivian sitting alone for a moment on the Wilcoxes' porch. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Chandler?" he asked, offering his hand. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, Mr. Chandler, I believe I am." Their return to the ranch was different from any previous journey. The knowledge that they would no longer say goodbye at Vivian's cabin door changed everything. When they arrived, Forrest surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home," he said softly, setting her down in the main room which had been transformed in her absence. Fresh wildflowers filled a vase on the table, new curtains hung at the windows, and a cheerful fire burned in the hearth. "When did you do all this?" Vivian asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Had some help from Margaret's daughter while we were getting ready this morning," Forrest admitted. "Wanted it to be special for you." "It's perfect," Vivian assured him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Everything is perfect." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation, tender, passionate, and deeply connecting. In Forrest's arms, Vivian found a love she had never imagined possible, one built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The ranch flourished under their combined care, with Vivian proving herself as capable and determined as Forrest had believed. Together, they planted the garden he had envisioned, constructed the small greenhouse, and expanded the cattle herd. In May, Margaret arrived with unexpected news. "The school board has reconvened," she announced over coffee at the Chandler kitchen table. "We've secured funding for a teacher starting in September." Vivian and Forrest exchanged glances. "Are you offering me the position?" Vivian asked carefully. "If you want it," Margaret confirmed. 3 days a week, fair salary. We know you're committed to the ranch now, but thought you might still want to teach." The offer was tempting. Teaching had been Vivian's passion and purpose for years, but before she could respond, Forrest spoke. "It's your decision, Vivian," he said earnestly. "The ranch is our priority, but I know teaching matters to you. We could make it work if it's what you want." Vivian's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to see and support her dreams even as they built a life together. "I'd like that," she admitted. "If we can arrange it around ranch responsibilities." And so a new pattern emerged. 3 days a week, Vivian rode to town to teach the children of Chisholm Ranch and the surrounding farms. The remaining days, she worked alongside Forrest on the ranch, learning and contributing in equal measure. Summer passed in a blur of activity, tending crops, managing cattle, preserving food for the coming winter. Their partnership deepened with each shared task, each problem solved together, each quiet evening spent planning their future. In August, Vivian missed her monthly cycle. By September, they were certain a child would join their family in spring. "A baby," Forrest said wonderingly, his hand resting gently on Vivian's still flat stomach. "Our baby." The joy in his eyes matched the fullness in Vivian's heart. This child would be born into love, into a home created through hard work and commitment. Vivian continued teaching until December, when winter weather and her advancing pregnancy made the journey to town impractical. The school board arranged for a temporary replacement, with the understanding that Vivian might return the following year if she wished. Winter settled over the ranch once more, but unlike the previous year, Vivian faced it not from a separate cabin, but from the warmth of their shared home. As Christmas approached, she and Forrest prepared for the holiday with simple decorations and carefully chosen gifts. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire, Vivian presented Forrest with a small package, a journal bound in leather, with his initials tooled into the cover. "For your stories," she explained as he examined it. "You have a gift with words, Forrest. The tales you tell of this land and its people deserve to be preserved." Touched, Forrest pulled her close. "My turn," he said, retrieving a wooden box from beneath their small tree. Inside lay a silver locket, simple but elegant. "It was my mother's," he explained as he fastened it around Vivian's neck. "She made me promise to give it to the woman I loved when I found her." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Perfect fit." As they celebrated the holiday, Vivian reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The desperate young woman stranded at Morrison's Crossing seemed like a different person entirely, someone from another lifetime. "What are you thinking?" Forrest asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "About Crossroads," Vivian replied, nestling against him. "About how the worst moments sometimes lead to the best ones." Forrest nodded, understanding. "If that stagecoach driver hadn't left you stranded, if you hadn't happened to pass by that exact spot, if the teaching position hadn't fallen through." They smiled at the chain of seemingly unfortunate events that had created their happiness. "I'm glad you were stranded," Forrest admitted, selfish as that sounds. "I'm glad you found me," Vivian countered, "and offered me a place to heal." Because healing was what had happened, though neither had recognized it at the time. Vivian had been wounded by loss and disappointment, Forrest by loneliness and abandoned dreams. Together, they had found not just love but restoration. Spring arrived with gentle rains and new growth bursting from the earth. As April turned to May, Vivian's time drew near. Margaret Wilcox arranged for the midwife to stay at a neighboring ranch, ready to attend when needed. On a warm May morning, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, Vivian gave birth to a son. Forrest, who had paced anxiously throughout her labor, wept unashamedly when the midwife placed the squalling infant in his arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, bringing the child to Vivian. "Look what we made." "James," Vivian said softly, touching the downy head. "After your father." "James Pierce Chandler," Forrest agreed, his voice thick with emotion. As summer returned to the territory, life settled into a new rhythm centered around their son. Vivian opted not to return to teaching immediately, choosing instead to focus on the ranch and the baby. The school board kept the position open, understanding her desire to be with her child during his first year. By the time James celebrated his first birthday, the ranch had expanded again: more cattle, a larger garden, improved outbuildings. The small cabin where Vivian had initially stayed now served as a guest house for visiting friends and the occasional traveler passing through. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James asleep in Vivian's arms, Forrest broached a subject they discussed occasionally over the years. "Been thinking about adding on to the house," he said. "Another bedroom, maybe a proper study for your books and papers." "Planning for more children?" Vivian asked with a smile. "Maybe." Forrest took her free hand. "But also thinking you might want to start a small school here at the ranch, for James eventually and the neighbors' children who live too far from town." Vivian's heart swelled at his thoughtfulness. "You do that? Why not? You're a born teacher. Seems a shame to limit that gift to 3 days in town. and this way you could still be home with James and any brothers or sisters that might come along. The idea took root and flourished. By the following year, Vivian had converted the old smokehouse into a small schoolroom, and children from neighboring ranches rode over 3 mornings a week for lessons. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's curiosity. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Elizabeth Margaret Chandler, named for both Vivian's mother and the friend who had helped make their lives in Chisholm possible. As the children grew, so did the ranch and its operations. Forrest's careful management and Vivian's organizational skills turned their modest holding into one of the most successful in the area. They hired additional hands, improved their breeding stock, and became known for both their hospitality and fair dealing. 10 years after that fateful day at Morrison's Crossing, Vivian stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Forrest teach 7-year-old James how to rope a calf. Elizabeth, now 4, sat on the steps beside her, practicing her letters in a small slate book. "Mama," the little girl said suddenly, "tell me again about how you and Papa met." Vivian smiled, having told the story many times. "I was stranded at a crossroads with no money left, and then your father rode up on his horse and offered me a place to stay." "And you falled in love," Elizabeth said confidently, mangling the verb in her excitement. "Yes, sweetheart. We fell in love." Forrest looked up then, as if sensing her gaze. Across the yard their eyes met and held, communicating without words the depth of their connection. So much had changed in 10 years, yet the foundation remained the same: 2 people who had found each other against all odds, building a life neither could have imagined alone. That evening, after the children were asleep, Forrest and Vivian sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Anything you regret?" he asked quietly. "About staying here, I mean. Instead of continuing to teach in town or maybe moving to a bigger place like Santa Fe?" Vivian considered the question seriously. "Not a thing," she finally answered. "This is where I was meant to be. With you, with our children, with this land." Forrest pressed a kiss to her hair. "That day I found you at the crossing, almost didn't take that route. Was planning to go straight to town by the main road. What made you change your mind?" "Something told me to check the south pasture first. No real reason." He shook his head at the memory. "Providence, I suppose." "Providence," Vivian agreed, thinking of all the seemingly random events that had brought them together. Or maybe just love finding its way. As night settled fully over the ranch, stars appearing in the vast New Mexico sky, Vivian thought again of that desperate young woman she had been, alone, afraid, with no clear path forward. How could she have known that being stranded at a crossroads would lead not to disaster, but to the greatest happiness she had ever known? "I love you, Forrest Chandler," she said softly, turning to look into the eyes that had captivated her from the beginning. "And I love you, Vivian Chandler," he replied, his voice still holding the wonder of a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have left."